it does look like the Vaush Meister is here. So we're off to the races, guys. Here we go. Let's go. Wish us good luck. Time to meet Vaush. What's up, man?
Howdy.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing great. How are y'all doing?
Doing pretty
Doing
good,
all
man.
right.
Thanks
doing
for
all right.
taking the time to chat with us.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Well, I think didn't I say I wanted to talk to you guys a while back? I was playing Banjo-Kazooie and somebody linked me a video. And
Yeah,
I saw you
I
were
do remember
live.
that, Vaush.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. Actually, I remember at the time we were down to discuss, but we had a guest that was like all queued up, ready to go, and it was kind of an important conversation. Not just the typical drama mongering that we typically do. So we wanted to get to that, but we're glad to finally engage with you. Obviously, we were telling the audience that we've made a lot of content reviewing your various takes, and we have given you credit in the past where we agree, but obviously there's been a lot of times too where we disagree, and I think that foreign policy is clearly one of those points of disagreement between myself and Zach and you, Vaush. So I think this is a really good context to have this debate. I know you put out a video responding to Zach and I's reaction to your take on drones, and I think there's a little bit of confusion about that off
Maybe
the
a
bat.
bit.
So
The direct convos are always better. I know how things get it's not just about confusion either. It's about tone. People are always going to be more charitable when you're speaking directly to someone. No, I'm happy to be talking to you guys. I actually just came off the cusp of having a convo with somebody who was in favor of the sentiment of the Iraq War. So I'm actually all primed for the for the foreign policy talks.
Oh God, yeah. I hope that we're a little bit more reasonable than whoever that was. I don't know how you could possibly defend the.
I'm sure you
Iraq
guys are
War.
pro Iraq War too. We're all reasonable people here.
Well, it's a good segue, Vosh, because the video that we reacted to, that in turn you reacted to of ours, had to do a little bit with the drone war, and just the war on terror in general in the post 9/11 era, and you got really hung up on your video about this whole thing. Are drones better than mines? And in your opinion, we seemingly misinterpreted your argument. You said that, no, I wasn't saying drones are good. Obviously not. I was just saying that drones are, clearly better than mines as a form of warfare. Mines, obviously kill far, far, far more civilians. So obviously, just off the bat, you're 100% right about that. And if we didn't specify that, no, that wasn't the argument we were trying to make. And sorry if it came off that way. We weren't trying to paint you in the incorrect light or an inaccurate light. So just off the bat, wanted to get that clear. But I think the point that we were trying to hammer you on a little bit more, or that we were at least trying to express our disagreement with, and I can play it if you want, just in case you want to deny that you said this or whatever. But what you said that I really took issue with was, we have a solid justification for engaging in drone strikes in Afghanistan to this day. That was the real meat of the issue where I disagreed with you. I think that even when it comes to killing Al-Qaeda leader, someone that was responsible for 9/11, I still don't think that justifies our drone war policy. And in fact, I think it feeds into the exact, State Department imperialist logic that ends up justifying the drone war in the first place, which obviously kills indiscriminate hundreds of thousands of civilians, far more, by the way, that were killed in 9/11 in the first place. So generally, I just don't think that the extrajudicial assassinations via drone are acceptable under basically any circumstance. And that was the gist of my beef with your take.
Yeah, I guess so there are two sides to this. There's the drone side and the extrajudicial execution side. Drones are here to stay whether we like it or not, because they're just the next step in warfare. They're going to be adopted eventually by every country that can afford them. Why would anyone ever risk committing a pilot, all the training and the cost of a plane, to make these hits or whatever. So drones are here to stay. It's their application that people are concerned with. And when it comes to the extrajudicial assassinations, I guess the main issue that I have is that these days terrorism is capable of being so international, and I don't really know what the best mechanism would be for retaliation against terrorist groups outside of stuff like this. It feels like drones make it about as good as can be, all things considered, right? You wouldn't want to do another invasion of Afghanistan every time a former Al-Qaeda leader popped up. That'd be kind of bad.
And I want to ask this genuinely. I really want to know your opinion, because you mentioned on the live stream, or your reaction live stream yesterday to us, when we made this point about the extrajudicial assassination. You're like, what, are we just supposed to go arrest him? And I genuinely want to know, why do you not think that's a possibility? Like, if we have the ability to wage the militaristic efforts that we do abroad, and we have the ability to occupy countries, do you really think it would like be impossible for us to send a team of CIA agents or whatever the hell to go apprehend this guy so we could give him a trial by jury, and we don't have to sacrifice the a very intrinsically American value of habeas corpus in the process, the logic of which has led to the atrocities at Guantanamo Bay and all of these other war crimes committed in the name of anti-terrorism?
Well, I think that in the context of warfare, which I think is kind of the attitude certainly we take with Al Qaeda, the Taliban, whatever, I don't think that the habeas corpus attitude is necessarily maintained. Obviously we can't put on trial every soldier we encounter. We could send people to arrest, but I mean, wouldn't that be worse? I mean, if you wanted to send in SEAL Team 6 every time you wanted to bring in some former terrorist leader, first of all, people are going to die because they're all holed up in compounds. We send folks in with guns. More people will die that way without trial, guards, whatever, than you'd get with a drone strike. If you manage to get them alive, which is not a guarantee, by the way, especially with some of the more, suicide vest-prone terrorist leaders. We don't know how gung-ho they are with their own livelihoods. And you would also have to commit troops to the ground, which is like, I don't know. I feel like internationally, people would think a lot less of the idea of like a Navy ship with SEALs coming out, like the whole process of extraditing somebody, killing their guards, bringing them to the U.S. It's a really tough situation. I don't know if that'd be better. It might just be more old-fashioned, I guess.
Well, I think that, and I'll just break in here. I hear a lot of what you're saying, right? Obviously, there's a net benefit for the United States and, our ambitions globally if we are able to, instead of sending our soldiers over somewhere to, as you mentioned, not only die, but to kill, the protectorates or the guards of any of these terrorist leaders that we're after. However, I think it just comes back down to what I would consider to be, sort of a matter of principle for how we're going to conduct ourselves internationally. And I think that if I'm not ready to concede that, we're just going to accept the death toll from, this international military industrial complex that makes a massive trove of money off of these civilian drone deaths. And I think that, of course, we have to, okay, if I can just finish with this one point really quickly. I just want to say that I think that obviously right now with the system that we have laid out, all of the arguments that you're saying, they make sense. But I think from my perspective and the perspective that Gavin and I are trying to unfold here as, people who view themselves as like staunchly anti-war in basically every circumstance that, and that's not to say that I'm here to like fucking sim for Russia on your team. Obviously we have like solidarity for Ukrainian people and grandmothers and all that kind of shit, right? We're not tankies. But I'm just saying that I think that if we're going to really reevaluate the United States global position on the militaristic stage and start leading by example, right? That we would have to unfortunately do things that are going to be basically terrible for us to continue to try and operate as we have 800 plus military bases around the world. I think we'd have to bring back a draft. I think we'd have to, engage in civilian combat where we have a civilian army, because then it forces the actual people on the ground here. And this is a Noam Chomsky argument, by the way. I know you're giving me the side eye. That if you force the civilians to be drafted, then they will no longer be okay with these senseless ambitions abroad, that we will no longer put our lives in favor of the money for Boeing, that we will no longer put our lives in favor of the money for Raytheon. And if we don't do that, then we are just saying that, okay, we're going to let business be run as usual. And as you said, Vaush, then the drone war will be here to stay. But I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts on an effort to eradicate a drone war, to upend a military industrial complex, even if you think that it's politically untenable at the moment?
Yeah, there was a lot loaded in there. I'm a huge advocate for reducing our military expenditures and retracting our position as like world police officers. What I'm saying right now with regards to like the drone striking of terrorist leaders, I would apply to any country that can get away with it, So England doesn't have 800 military bases across the world, or India or whatever. But if there was the reason I think Afghanistan is special is because it's essentially a terrorist state. I mean, it basically is now with the Taliban in charge, meaning diplomacy isn't really on the table. It's just not a mechanism that's viable there. If it was possible to extradite people you know, if Afghanistan was cooperative to the point where we could be like, hey, we'll give you guys, I don't know, what do you want? You know, billions, just we'll give you something. Can you give us the Al Qaeda person? You know, great. I think that'd be lovely. It would be a great sign of trust. The Afghanistan situation as it stands right now is a lot more complicated, and it seems like there's a greater pretext for you know, just sort of a free-for-all Fortnite match over who gets to murk the Al Qaeda leaders first. When it comes to the drone war stuff, drones are here to stay. They're just an advancement technologically in terms of the means of killing people at a distance. It's how we use them that really matters. I am happy that the U.S. military-industrial complex has made an effort to make drones and their strikes less likely to kill civilians with that ninja missile shit they're doing. I think that's a good step. Because ideally, you know, you wouldn't want to kill any civilians. Many civilians are going to die as a product of any military action. The goal would be to reduce that as much as possible. And I guess it would be a trade-off. What level of civilian deaths are you willing to accept as a trade-off for any successful military action? We have to consider this with anything. World War II, you know, the invasion of the Pacific. I mean, any military action entails with it a threat. Drones have a uniquely low likelihood of civilian deaths relative to other mechanisms. Obviously, ground war is going to harm a lot more civilians. If you're trying to kill like one guy on the ground, like a drone's a way more effective way of doing it.
Fair.
So all this stuff's really complicated. I don't have any like hard jingoistic answers for stuff like this, because part of it is like the inevitable material advancement of means of warfare, and part of it is like the cultural place that America operates on at the world stage. And there's an intersection there that's really tough.
Well, let's talk about the cultural place where America stands in the world right now, because you're saying that Afghanistan is a terrorist state. And while I might agree with you, I think from the perspective of the Afghani people, or, you know, a lot of other Middle Eastern people in general, we would be a terrorist state. As I mentioned, our drone strikes and airstrikes have killed well over 50,000 people since 9/11, which killed 3,000 people. Again, that's civilian murders carried out by the United States. So according to your logic, and I brought this up in our video, you mostly laughed it off. But do you really want to live in the world where Al Qaeda is, you know, okay to drone our leaders, drone George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden? If the logic you're extending to their drone strikes applies, then, you know, do you really want to live in a world where every country is just drone striking their adversary? I think that's not really an ideal geopolitical situation that anyone would want to operate in, especially not from like a pacifist perspective.
No, I get that. So when I say terrorist, I should be more clear, you know. The United States is a sponsor of a great deal of state terrorism. I would never deny that. It's more a matter of what alternatives do you have. In Afghanistan, no option exists at the moment with the Taliban in charge outside of, you know, throwing a bomb in a match in. There's just not really a mechanism for diplomatic engagement. In the U.S., of course, there is.
Their vehicle for diplomatic engagement was 9/11. That's the problem. The same logic that you're applying to our drone strikes, they applied to the attack on America in 9/11. They were getting back at us for our terrorism and war crimes.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare a terrorist attack against civilians to a targeted strike on an Al Qaeda official.
Does it really matter what the reason is if 50,000 plus civilians end up massacred? Does it really matter what I mean, Vaush, one sec. When you talk about Russia and Ukraine, you always say, well, of course there's going to be a justification for everything. Of course Putin is going to justify his invasion of Ukraine somehow. Obviously, no one does these militaristic actions without justification. Well, the only thing that separates our terrorism from Al Qaeda's is that you think they have a better justification. The same thing that you constantly rail against other, you know, geopolitical superpowers for using as excuses for their crimes.
Well, the difference is the justification that Putin is using is a pretext for war. In this case, though, whether or not you should kill a person is actually heavily influenced by the legitimacy of any, you know, crime you would try to pin to them, right? I don't think the people in, you know, the towers necessarily did anything wrong, apart from being financiers and New Yorkers. You know, the Al Qaeda man, you know, he certainly earned our spite. It's really like a matter of what you can get away with, right? And what the best option is given the context of that situation. So this is the reason why I was massively against the attack on Soleimani in the Iraqi airport, you know? Now, I don't like Iran. They do state-sponsored terrorism. They got some of their folks to shoot missiles at our bases, you know? Very cringe, not great. Soleimani, massive piece of shit. But doing so Iran is a country you can negotiate with. In fact, it's a country we should be. You know, the Obama steps towards the, you know, the Iran peace deal, Trump
Probably the
dismantling
best thing he
it.
ever did.
Oh, no, yeah, like huge shit right there, right? Like, I want Iran to be treated as like an honored diplomatic guest. Do I like the country? No. Do I like America? No. You know, what am I, a hypocrite? Just murking one of their guys in an airport is insane, like fucking wild to me, because it feels like if you have issues with what Soleimani is doing, and don't get me wrong, he did a lot of bad stuff, there's another avenue. There's always another avenue you can go through. When it comes to Afghanistan and like former Al-Qaeda leaders, I'm a bit more laissez-faire, because it feels like any of the alternate options we have in that context would involve potentially risking greater international trouble. No American leader would ever risk losing a you know, like a member of a SEAL team,
Right.
trying to apprehend someone they could just like annihilate from 8 miles away.
Right.
And it might cause more death to just do that. So it seems like we're kind of trading deaths here.
I mean,
in a
I
way that's a
get
little
what you're
petty.
saying. Like I get the theory behind drone warfare and why like you're saying that it's better than the alternative. I definitely understand that. But again, I think by like feeding into the post 9/11 war on terror logic of just throwing habeas corpus in the trash, I really do think you're feeding into the exact same talking points which led to the atrocities committed at Guantanamo Bay, committed against untold, you know, hundreds of innocent people that were tortured or killed or, you know, killed as collateral damage, again under this guise of anti-terrorist war on terror activity, which continues to this day.
Okay, wait, can I ask you? Because I'm curious, right? So international terrorism is easier now than ever before, right? Like, you know, the way we're all connected. If there were people in Afghanistan, let's some new fucking leader, whatever, he pops up, funds a terrorist attack, directly leads to 17 people dying in France or whatever, right? You know, people are mad, something has to be done. But dude's somewhere in Afghanistan, he's in a fortress, you know. Do you think, and I'm seriously asking, there's like 3 options, right? You drone strike, easy. You attempt to arrest, potentially very bloody and destructive, but you do get to put them on trial, maybe, if they live. Or third, you ignore it. Of those 3, do you side with the arrest?
Here, let me tell you, and I want to explain this a little bit because I think that the conversation we're having is very similar to the conversation surrounding the death penalty. Obviously, I understand why people would say this guy's a complete piece of shit. He deserves to be punished via the death penalty. He doesn't deserve life. I can sympathize with that argument. I can understand why people make that argument in the same way that you're making the argument that you are right now. However, because of the fact that there's even a less than 1% chance of the wrong person, an innocent person, dying as a result of the death penalty, I'm against it in principle. I feel the same way about the drone war and these drone targets, you know, your hypothetical terrorist who just killed 17 people and will kill again. Yes, I understand the context in which people would say, yeah, drone the fucker. It's going to be way easier and less people will die as a result. I understand that, just like I understand the logic behind the death penalty. But the fact that there's a significant likelihood that civilian people, innocent people, are going to die, or even the wrong person altogether. Numerous times we've said, oh, we droned the guy, and then either we didn't or it was actually someone else. You know, later it turns out they're still alive. I don't trust the U.S. in this instance. Just like I don't trust us to execute the right person. Therefore, in principle, I'm against the entire theory.
The difference, though, is that the death penalty is something enacted potentially on a person who's already incarcerated. The alternative to their death is incarceration, meaning they're already under control. Failing to deal with a terrorist leader could lead to them killing again, potentially. And you might enact more death in an attempt to arrest them. You could drone strike them and kill 3, or attempt to arrest them by storming a compound, killing 17, including like a SEALs officer. In that case,
happens via drones anyway. Like I said, 50,000 people plus have died because of the drone war since 9/11. That happens anyway.
I'm isolating a circumstance. You're talking about, when you say drone warfare have killed 50,000 plus, you're talking about the modern front of weaponry across all conflict zones across a 20-year period. I'm just talking about this specific hypothetical. If you take a look, like my content broadly, overwhelmingly I tend to be against what we do with drone strikes. I covered extensively that bullshit under the Biden admin following our retreat from Afghanistan, where there was those fucking kids in the van or whatever who got murked by, and the dipshits from the feds were like laughing about it and they didn't check their data beforehand. Like, overwhelmingly, I'm going to come out against the processes.
Like, no wonder they won't negotiate with us then, right, Vaush?
Well, the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda officials would never negotiate with us broadly, right? I mean, they probably wouldn't if the Taliban shaped up and turned into like real state administrators, they were like capable of international negotiations, I would probably retract all this. I would be like, yeah, we need to talk with them about this.
Well, then that's my question here. If I could just jump in really quickly with, one of the other things that I don't think has been mentioned so far is that we are also systematically starving the country of Afghanistan of a bunch of its resources right now. In your mind, is it completely impossible that if we send over some diplomats to say, hey, we can negotiate a way of you guys having control of this country again, we give you back these funds, let's that would be the way that's not, let's go in and kill with the drones, or let's go put more boots on the ground, right? I'm just wondering why that's not even considered a possibility. And I'm not trying to sound like hippy dippy whatever, but I'm just saying that if we have something that is leverage, right, i.e. the entire fortune of the country of Afghanistan and all of its wealth that, is as a result of our holding on to it, is starving all of its people, right? We hold all of those cards. Don't you think that they would come to the negotiation table if we're like, hey, we will give this back, but you kind of have to, in the same way that you said Iran, obviously they do a bunch of fucked up things. They're a terrorist state, but you believe that, they can be negotiated with and therefore they should be. I'm wondering if you think that there could be some sort of negotiated diplomacy between Afghanistan and the United States that's like, hey, we will give you back all of this money and resources. Your people will stop starving. They will love you because you are able to be the, leader that returned Afghanistan to, some sort of stability in any kind of sense, right? Whatever that turns out to be. And in return, over the next like 15 or 20 years, you have to meet these kinds of metrics. I don't know. Again, it's not like a perfect example. I'm not a U.S. diplomat. I'm a bartender in Kansas City, but
I'm also not a U.S. diplomat.
Yeah.
So happens.
But to me, right, it's like, that just seems like it should at least be on the table for discussion, right? Like if we're going to be talking about extrajudicial killings, if we're going to be talking about putting troops on the ground, like it just seems absurd to me that we can't look at this obvious potential pathway to, diplomatic kind of agreement that's not going to result in, more deaths. And even so, Vaush, as a caveat to giving them their money back, I think it would make perfect sense for us to say, okay, then you guys are going to, exist under the rule of international law. And if you engage in terrorism, or if one of your citizens engages in international terrorism, then you are going to agree to let the international community collect that person and prosecute them for their crimes in front of a trial or a jury or whatever.
No, I'm fully in favor of that. As a concept, I'll always lean towards diplomacy. Even with countries like Iran and North Korea or whatever, I still think it's like the right road to take. It's difficult because the Taliban don't operate in good faith. I mean, they're like, when we say terrorist state, like we know the U.S. and Israel are terrorist states, but like the Taliban are literally a terrorist.
Ask the Native Americans if we negotiate in good faith, though, right?
Oh, wait, well, okay, hold on. We're not defending American, unilaterally or whatever, but right now, like, the Taliban are uninterested in diplomacy.
I think that's because we're holding all of their shit hostage, right?
Well, but they, like, ideologically, there's a disposition there. Now, I think that could be addressed, possibly, if there was some kind of condition, like you need to establish a liaison with the United States or with the United Nations, and you need to be under, like, international watch, and if you do those things, then we'll unlock your finances, or we'll not sanction you, or whatever. Like, I think there might be a way through that. Eventually, the Taliban might, like, grow accustomed to governance, and they might chill out a little bit. That would be ideal, because there's really only two options, right? You accept the Taliban control Afghanistan, or you remove them, which we already did, and, look where that got us, right? So clearly not not an operate strategy. It's unfortunate. I don't like working with people like that because, they suck. But we only have so many options here. If there was like a rebel group that we could fight, but then even that got fucked up. We know the Mujahideen. Yeah. Okay, so.
How are we going to take the moral high ground though and say you're a terrorist state and we can do whatever if us doing whatever means terrorism and war crimes? Like, I don't see how that gives us any sort of a moral authority over the situation. And largely that's why I'm an anti-interventionist in general. It's because even if there are horrible things going on in X patch of dirt in X part of the country or world, yeah, guess what? We're funding and we're enabling a lot more shit that's just as bad, if not worse, around the world, via what we're funding in Israel and Palestine, or with Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Like, we have no moral high ground to make these judgments and be like, since we're the world police, as you said earlier, we get to drone strike you and commit war crimes against you because you're not negotiating in good faith. Like, I just see that as kind of a sacrifice of any sort of moral authority or credibility we would be bringing to the table in the first place. And again, just because this one guy, obviously, fuck him, he deserves to die, I'm still not going to celebrate it if it legitimizes a broader strategy, which, results in more terrorism itself than the very terrorism it's supposed to fight.
I don't think we have moral authority. I just think we have regular authority. We're just the strongest hegemon in the world. We'll do what we want. I just think it's a
Well, I'm saying
responsibility
we
of.
shouldn't. That's all
Well,
my argument is
well,
that
we
we obviously we're the world hegemon. No one's arguing that. I'm saying that
the
as the world
Chinese do.
hegemon, we should be a lot more responsible, and we shouldn't be committing war crimes under the guise of
No,
anti-terrorism.
I don't think it's a war crime to drone strike the Al Qaeda guy. But with regards to like what we can do, we're going to do whatever we think we can get away with. I think we have a responsibility to rein that in, because I don't think that means what we're going to do is morally right. At the end of the day, like, whoever's the strongest in the world is going to have a lot of say over the behavior and the organization of the countries that fall under its umbrella. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. And as long as we can acknowledge that, we can make decisions within that framework. So when it comes to Afghanistan, nobody's going to leave Afghanistan untouched, right? Like, China was making like eyes at Afghanistan before we even removed our troops, you know, with like investment agreements. Everyone wants a piece of every part of the world. So the goal is to make sure that whoever has the right in a militaristic sense, I guess, to take a piece from the world is doing so in the best possible way. As it stands right now, I think we should be pushing for diplomacy, and we should be pushing for the greatest possible degree of direct civic engagement, even with states like Afghanistan controlled by the Taliban. However, as long as they are not willing to work with us under any capacity, if some fucking bombs get dropped on their territory, especially when the targets are so deserving, it seems like a relatively innocuous extension of our near unlimited hegemony. Now, that doesn't mean you can't criticize the broader process, you know. The drone war and the fact that right now, like, you can just drone strike whoever, right? Like, I mean, we can do whatever we want. The fact that we have the ability to unleash that kind of power with so little oversight is a problem. But in specific instances where people like, you know, the Al Qaeda guy get dropped, I won't work myself up about it too much.
Well, like I said, if a fucking, you know, mass rapist pedophile gets the death penalty, I'm not going to shed a tear for him, but that doesn't mean I'm going to legitimize and defend the death penalty as a concept. Are you pro death penalty?
No, I'm not pro death penalty.
So would you celebrate if some like asshole piece of shit received the death penalty and died? Like, are you going to go out here and be like, yeah, that was based?
If some asshole piece of shit, damn, I kind of might. If a system exists that I disagree with, will I celebrate good outcomes from a bad system? Yeah, I have to, because I'm an anarchist. I mean, I don't even like the police, right? But I'll still celebrate if a rapist gets arrested. I would never go like, no, I don't like that.
Technically, an arrest is something that I view as within the bounds of a moral society. I'm not talking about being arrested. I'm talking about the death penalty, which is what drone strikes are, just extrajudicially implemented.
But if you're an anarchist, any arrest, any incarceration is an exemplification of the power of the judicial system, something that I'm morally opposed to. But I still celebrate if bad people get arrested, right? As long as we live in a set of unjust systems, I think it's possible to simultaneously celebrate the rare good outcomes while also condemning the broader like nature of that system. There are lots of systems that I disagree with that still occasionally produce good results.
The problem is, Vaush, you didn't just defend the killing of this 9/11 mastermind. You said at the beginning of your video, I believe drone strikes are justifiable in Afghanistan, period. You didn't say in this specific instance and every other instance is, you know, not acceptable. You said broadly it's acceptable to carry out drone strikes in Afghanistan at this point, despite the fact that we've already agreed from their perspective, we're just as bad, if not far worse of a terrorist state than they are, having, you know, massacred untold hundreds of thousands more of their people than they ever have here in America. So
I don't think considerations like that are meaningful. We're not talking about moral high grounds here, only reasonable geopolitical pretext. I think that Afghanistan is a field in which justifications can be made for drone strikes against legitimate targets, because the governance of Afghanistan is completely uncooperative with us. And also basically just waged a war against the people we were allied with.
Isn't that the justification that was used to go into Afghanistan and Iraq in the first place?
I don't know, not at all. We had to lie about Iraq. We had to lie like to the UN. Colin Powell had to deliver a bunch of made up bullshit about the potential for WMDs in Iraq. And then we lied about like every step of the invasion. and also invasions are a very destructive
Right. So
mechanism.
then why would you trust the U.S. government and the State Department to be calling these shots in a moral way? If you
do you
agree that they're
trust
lying?
police departments?
Absolutely not.
Well, do you celebrate if like a local rapist gets arrested?
Well, I think they should have a trial by jury, and that's all I'm advocating here for.
But that's still an extension of the power of the judicial
Okay,
system.
you can't
no?
say that a drone strike is the same thing as a policeman arresting someone. I
Well,
understand what you're trying to do,
you
but that's
compared
not the same
9/11
thing.
to murking an Al Qaeda guy. I'm just saying we're talking about bad systems but good outcomes.
Well,
here,
can I jump in here, guys, for a second? Because I think that one of the like elephants in the room here, and one of the reasons why I just think that a lot of the things that we are doing in Afghanistan with our drone program, Vaush, are undeniably maintaining the fact that the Taliban is not going to negotiate with us in good faith, right? They will not. Why would they? If we just assassinated, what's his fucking face?
keep forgetting his name too. Yes.
Yeah, dude. What was that? Yeah, Aman al Zawahiri or something like
yeah.
that. I'm fucking terrible at pronouncing people's names. Anyway, a big Al Qaeda leader, second in chain of command, right? Okay. If we keep doing that, and then we also just agreed earlier harmoniously for a moment that it was absolutely terrible what happened in January of this year in Kabul with the children that were massacred by the drone strikes. I just think that you can't both say, "Oh, I am pro diplomacy," yet I still think that it's justified for the United States to go in there and keep salting a massive wound. The only way that the Taliban will ever become an esteemed, established political figure or leaders of a nation, whatever, the only way that that's ever going to happen is if the United States actually comes to negotiate in good faith, which we never do, right? So here I am advocating that instead of saying, oh, damned if we do, damned if we don't, let's just drone away anyway, let's say, no, let's change our policy in Afghanistan. Let's go there. Let's go in there and negotiate and say, all right, here's the way that international law is dramatically staged in the West's favor. It's impossible that we will ever change it, probably 100% out of our favor, but let's offer them a bunch of their fucking money back. All of it is what we should do, right? And let's say, okay, here are the ways in which case we're willing to negotiate in good faith. We're not going to bomb your fucking country anymore. We're not going to take out any of your civilians. We're going to stop starving your children. We're going to provide people with, resources to deal with the millions of starving orphans that are in your country now because of the wrongdoing that we did. I think all of us on this stream would agree that, we've done a lot of wrong in Afghanistan. So if we need to start building amends with these people, if we ever want them to negotiate in good faith, otherwise they are just going to continue to see us as the monsters that we've deserved to be seen as on the international stage. We can't simultaneously be the good guys and the people who drone their country to bits and pieces, because every time we do, we just create more justification for them to come and, do a terrorist response, right? Like I
agree with that to an extent, but it's not like they haven't broken agreements before, right? For instance,
so have we though. That's
well,
what
wait,
I'm saying.
I know that. Again, this isn't like a moral high. I don't care. I don't like America. It's not like a defending America's right. We just have the power to make these decisions, so we have to trust or decide not to trust. The Taliban, for instance, agreed not to house Al Qaeda leaders in Afghanistan. So technically, the fact that that guy was in Afghanistan at all was a violation of agreements that we made with them. I have to ask, like, because if we could guarantee their good faith negotiation, I would be on board. But what would you do if the Taliban like negotiated with us, got their resources back, lied, broke their agreements, which they've done before, and just continued operating as a tyrannical, oppressive, governmental force within their
You're
own
asking what I
country.
would do if I was like, president?
Well, basically, if they lied about it, got their resources back, and then they continue to house like terrorist leaders who make attacks both against us and our allies, like would you risk a full conflict with Afghanistan by sending in troops for an arrest, or would you drone strike the leaders, or would you just let it be because like we can't do anything without a full invasion?
Well, I don't think that you can't do anything without a full invasion. And I think that, from my own perspective point, like I don't support the United States being the world police operation. So if you're asking me what I would personally do, I would say that, we need to continue to strengthen an international coalition that's going to find states that, perform and commit terrorist acts or sponsor terrorist acts guilty. I think that that's the only reasonable solution. I don't think that there's any way to maintain any kind of order internationally, and I don't think there's any way to maintain any kind of respectability or fair ground if you're going to have one nation state playing world police. So I think
what do we do? Do we just let them be? Because that's like a national security issue, right? Like if the terrorist leaders are still operating, they just have a base in Afghanistan. Like, do we just let them, like, we
But
just
again,
get their
what about
guys
the
when they come to
terrorist
arms?
leaders that are here in America that, from their perspective, have massacred? I mean, not just from their perspective, factually, have massacred and killed far more people over there than they have over
I
here.
know there are people here in America who deserve to hang for what they've done, but we're only talking about like what to do about this situation here, right? Look, I'm a revolutionary, at least ideologically I am. There are plenty of people here in America for whom I have strong words, okay? You know, I don't want to get TOS'd here by YouTube or whatever, but trust me, okay? I reserve plenty of enmity for the people within our own country, with our own systems. But just, if you were like with the system we have now, if we were dealing with like active terrorist leaders in a country like Afghanistan. Now, if they were in Iran or something, or Saudi Arabia, you would have to negotiate. Iran and Saudi Arabia are developed, actualized countries that are capable of sitting with us at a table and talking it out. Maybe they don't always act in good faith, more Saudi Arabia than Iran historically, but you can talk with them. Afghanistan won't, like, because they're breaking their agreements in this hypothetical. So do you just let them be, or like how do you address that, I guess?
I mean, generally, like I said, I'm an anti-interventionist. But if there's actually someone who is guilty, like we talked about, I do generally think that, yeah, if we need to, go in and apprehend him, then that should be the way we do it. And, at least then we're actually facing the potential consequences of our involvement abroad, rather than just sending some drone to, kill them and probably civilians as well. I just don't see how, like, that situation justifies us doing terrorism.
Civilians would die if we sent in people to arrest a terrorist leader being held by the Taliban. Like, we would be fighting, we would have to make our way through population centers. Taliban soldiers would be there. Innocent Taliban, I mean, a lot of these people are just 18-year-olds who, grew up in the wrong, like, Islamicist propaganda. Like, you would, like, it seems like that would inevitably lead to far more death of innocent, maybe not innocent, untried people than a drone strike would. In a consequential sense, it just seems like a really difficult bid. And I don't think there's an easy answer anywhere here. I don't like really celebrate any of this.
Right.
I celebrate the death of an Al-Qaeda leader. The whole drone malarkey, I don't think there's any like clean moral side here. The nature of drones, they're terrifying. We have the ability to enact our power anywhere, with very little oversight and with very little commitment. No troops on the ground means no cameras. We can get away with a lot, and it just seems like it's a program that lacks oversight. But working within the framework that we have, the fact that drones are just the future of warfare and military engagement, I guess if I had to choose between risking another ground war with the Taliban, doing nothing, or just sending in a drone to kill the guy, I would choose the drone. And I think there are problems with that, but I think there are worse problems with the other two options.
Well, yeah, that's my whole premise of my argument, Vaush, is that I just reject that dichotomy, right? Because I agree with you 100%. I agree with you that, there are massive drawbacks to having a groundswell of individuals that, the U.S. Army just go in there and storm and take whoever terrorists down. But I also think there's massive amounts of problems with the United States drone program as it is. And that's why I think we need to all collectively advocate for a strategy that completely eradicates that drone problem, not one that just says, okay, this is a necessary evil that we have to live with. It's kind of like, in a weird sense, and I'm not trying to be too far-fetched here, but it's kind of like capitalism, right? Like, capitalism is something that it seems like we just have to live with, right? But we all three here know that we don't. We can choose to live another way. We can collectively raise our voices, that we can make changes, and that we can overturn this deeply rigid capitalist militaristic system. And I think that the same perspective that we have on that, where we know it's an uphill battle, where we know we're going to have to take small victories, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, persistence, that is the way of the, social and political change in this country, right? But we have to reject the framing that just like we have to reject the framing that the only way forward is under U.S. capitalism, and how can we, ease the suffering of individuals under capitalism? Like, no, we have to imagine a way that is, completely free of suffering and abandons capitalism. I just think you have to do the same thing when it comes to drone policy and U.S. military-industrial complex.
Drone
you have to
policy...
envision a better world. Hold on a second, Bob.
Oh, sorry.
I think you have to envision a better world, because if we do not, then we have to be signing our names off on the death certificates of all of these individuals, whether or not their deaths come from international terrorists, whether they come from the United States terrorist activities abroad, whether they come from drone strikes, whatever it is. We're complicit in that. And I just think that we'd all three agree that the only path forward is for us to envision a world where we do not have those kinds of problems. And, I'm open to all kinds of suggestions, but I just think we have to reject the supremacy of drone warfare and U.S. militarism.
Well, there's a lot wrapped in there. I think you can challenge a ton about our drone policy while acknowledging that in some circumstances, a drone strike on a terrorist leader might be a good thing. Because what you're talking about is a wholesale rejection, or possibly the use of drones exclusively for on-the-ground military purposes, a la Bayraktar, Ukraine, so on and so on. The drones are here to stay. They're a militarily efficient weapon. It's just how they're used, really. And right now, we have very little oversight in how we use them. I do vehemently oppose that. This is just an instance where I'm more accepting of it because it feels like in this situation, the consequences of other sets of actions might have been worse.
Yeah.
But that's it, really. It's not a strong ideological commitment. And I do hope, ultimately, that our policy gets shaved down to a point where we're incredibly moderate with our use of these tools. Biden, for example, has been doing so many fewer drone strikes than Obama did in the later
and we give
Trump
him credit
has.
for that.
Yeah, and so clearly, there are changes to be made. Trump did restrict the reporting on the civilian deaths from drones, right? Like there was he restricted the public info access on who the targets of the drones were and who was affected. I think it was something like that. I would need to reread it. There are ways to make it better and worse. But if the broader policy is a reduction in U.S. military hegemony, a reduction in the poor oversight of our systems that we use to kill, I'm fully on board with both of you. We might draw the lines at different points on very specific niche issues, and murking the one of the guys behind 9/11 is definitely a niche issue. That is not every person who's been killed by drones. I wish, not by a long shot, right? Very, very, very select. But I think on the whole, we have similar political instincts on this.
Yeah, no, I understand that, Vaush, and I definitely see where you're coming from. Like I said, I can sympathize in specific incidents, just like with the death penalty. I can understand why people would make the argument. It's just that in principle, I have to disagree with it. But yeah, I mean, again, I understand where you're coming from. The only thing I worry about is that I feel like sometimes you're using this excuse of U.S. hegemony and the fact that we are the superpower. You're almost using it to excuse or normalize the war crimes we commit as if they aren't terrorism, versus when Al Qaeda does
crime?
something or blows something up, it is terrorism, and they don't have the right to strike back, but we do, et cetera, et cetera. And it almost sometimes reminds me of the people that defend Russia in the Ukraine-Russia war. Look at all this context. They're the dominant force in their region. Look at all the stuff that happened 5 years ago. All these excuses, et cetera, et cetera. They have the right to do this. I sometimes hear echoes of that for you, just on the pro-America side. Not that I'm saying you are pro-U.S. imperialism, but I do think that sometimes you, whether intentionally or not, I do think you end up kind of regurgitating the State Department framing, the pro-America hegemony perspective when you talk about these things, versus just acknowledging where war crimes are, whoever commits them.
I'm not defending any war crimes here, though. I don't think it's a war crime to take out an Al Qaeda guy.
I understand that, but that's 1 in 100 drone strikes.
But I'm not defending the other. But you don't attribute.
You said
to
we
me
have a justification to do drone strikes in Afghanistan, not just the specific one.
Afghanistan is an area where there might be a pretext. Afghanistan is a field where I think drone strikes can be permitted if the target's permitted. But that doesn't mean every target in Afghanistan is justifiable. That only means that it's a fair ground for acceptable use of drone strikes.
Right, but we're talking about the U.S. military here in the State Department, and if you give them an inch, they're going to take a fucking mile, as we've seen. If you give them one justification to do something that's illegal and a war crime, they're going to do it in 100 other instances which aren't justified at all. That's how this works, and that's the problem here. Obviously,
that's
in the specific instance,
slippery slope argument that you can make for literally anything. If you give them pretext to invade Germany as part of World War II, then you've given them pretext to invade Vietnam. If you think it's okay to arrest a person who's raped people, then you think it's okay to arrest people who have done nothing wrong. There are systems of power out there that are very, very, very dangerous. I'm only excusing this instance, and I think that Afghanistan's an area where we have less leeway for diplomatic negotiation than we do elsewhere.
So just to clarify, this is the only drone strike that you're okay with happening in Afghanistan?
There are a few others. There have been retaliatory drone strikes that have exclusively killed members of insurgent groups that attacked our soldiers that I'm okay with. This is just one of the rare, because overwhelmingly when I hear about a drone
strikes likely killed civilians, you're still okay with that?
No, I agree with the ones that don't kill civilians. I generally agree with them after the fact.
Well, that's like saying I'm pro-war only when it's good. You have to be either.
No, you're completely on board with that one. I am pro-war when the war is good.
I generally think that an anti-interventionist approach is better, and that we should try to avoid war at all, no matter what, that we should always seek a diplomatic response. And if any civilians have any chance of dying, then we just create the possibility of becoming just as bad of terrorists as the terrorists we're fighting.
Like World War II? Like, were we doing a Holocaust?
You know what I'm talking about.
Well, no, wait. Well, you can't shy away from the counterexample when your argument is a rejection of counterexamples. World War II was an example where, yeah, we did do a bit of trolling on Normandy, and yeah, I think it was pretty okay. I'm okay with our invention. Now, we did fucked up things during World War II. Don't get me wrong, right? Japanese internment camps being a big one domestically. Across the sea, we fucking bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
If we were talking about like a morally consistent, morally authoritative government, then I would agree with you, Vaush. However, how many wars have happened since World War II, and how many of them were justified? 0 of them were justified that were carried out by the U.S. Absolutely 0. You have to go back to the 40s to find a war that the U.S. has participated in that was even remotely moral. We're talking about a literal terrorist government here that indiscriminately massacres civilians under the guise, as you always talk about, Russia has an excuse. Obviously, they're going to have a justification for invading Ukraine. Obviously, every superpower is always going to have a justification or excuse for whatever they're doing. Why do you not see that as being the case here?
Well, would you say that as an argument against invading Germany in World War II? Because you would be afraid of giving the racist white supremacist...
We're not talking about World War II. We're talking about the present day and the fact that every war since World War II that the U.S. has been engaged in has been immoral and unethical and unjustified and illegal.
What if this drone strike was the World War II of drone strikes? I mean, that sounds like a joke, but that is what I'm arguing. Overwhelmingly, war is a bad thing. Overwhelmingly, drone strikes are a bad thing. But there are instances, I think, where they can be justifiable.
Just like the death penalty. I agree. In certain instances, I can understand the logic behind it, but I'm not going to legitimize the system as a whole because of that.
But the death penalty entails a counter option of indefinite internment. But what if you had a dangerous criminal who was on the run, they might get away. You can't arrest them because they're in a
if we had sent people to apprehend Zahari and he was running away and shooting at us, then yeah, if he got killed in the crossfire, then that's his own fault. However, that's not what happened. We sent a drone there to extrajudicially assassinate him. That's not the same thing.
I agree that they're not the same things, but I do think that's a more direct comparison. Even in the death penalty, the choice not to engage in the death penalty means that they live and that they're contained in a prison. Whereas the choice not to drone strike could potentially mean they die anyway. It could mean they get away entirely. It's a little more ambiguous because you're not making the decision after they've been incarcerated. It's a little more up in the air. We do the same thing with criminals, right? Like cops will chase criminals and, maybe a cop fires and maybe the criminal wasn't immediately a threat to the cop, but sometimes it's justifiable if the criminal has a gun and is running into a civilian area. These ambiguities are really tough to get around on a principle basis. Because if you do so, is it wrong for cops to shoot people who are unarmed? Overwhelmingly, I agree. But are people who are unarmed entirely lacking in lethal threat to others? No, they're not. There could be a gun on the ground, I like to evaluate stuff based on a case-by-case basis, one in which I'm overwhelmingly against the hegemonic solution. But every once in a while, you have a World War II, you have a Al-Qaeda 9/11 terrorist guy, and you have a person who's unarmed but is like seconds away from menacing or killing a civilian.
I see the point you're trying to make, Vaush, and I think the reason that we keep going in this merry-go-round is because what it comes down to is that if you're trying to split the minutia about whether or not, one is like on paper in each instance better or less in terms of casualties in a vacuum, then you can kind of play that game for a long time, right? You can say, oh, okay, well, what if in this situation it's better to have, hit him with the drone because it would have caused more deaths. But what I think that the real problem and the crux of the disagreement that we all have here is that I think Gavin and I are both saying that even though it might behoove us in certain instances to use a drone in a specific instance instead of sending a ground strike in, that we need to radically shift the United States foreign policy in a way that it does not require us to fucking do that.
I agree.
We need to and then I think we have harmonious agreement on that.
Also, Vaush, you brought up this example of the cops shooting someone who's like running away or whatever. This policy has also led to cops abusing their authority over and over again as an excuse to murder unarmed innocent people.
Yeah,
like even
I want to change the policy.
What was that?
No, that's a perfect comparison. I want to change the policy, but there have been instances where a criminal running away did need to get shot because it's possible that they were right about to menace, threaten a civilian. They might have had a weapon on them that a cop saw earlier. So the policy I disagree with, just like both of you. I disagree with our drone policy. I disagree with our attitude towards war. But even in policies that I disagree with, there are always going to be individual instances of things that I think in the specific context of the situation worked out okay.
Yeah,
And
well,
I
I mean,
believe that about lots of bad systems. I have
sure,
to.
sure.
I'm an anarchist.
I understand that, Vaush. And again, the only thing I disagree with is just that in principle, I have to come out against the system as a whole, a system which leads to the deaths of estimates, say 9 out of 10 targets, being civilian. Obviously, we know that thanks to the whistleblower Daniel Hale, who's currently in prison for telling the truth about our drone program. Again, if we were a moral government, if we were a government that was consistent when it came to picking and choosing our battles, then I might agree, like theoretically, but that's not the case. We're dealing with a government that, as I said, has since World War II only engaged in unethical and immoral and illegal wars. I mean, you were talking about mines yesterday, and how horrific they are. There's another example of the terrorism we've wrought all over the world. I don't think that justifies other countries drone striking our leaders. So just as a principle,
Inshallah. Every once in a while, there's a World War II. That's all I'm saying. And I would never. And if people back in like 1939 were like, we can't invade Germany. America is a white supremacist nation that has historically used its power to colonize the Philippines and do horrible things in Latin America and Panama and so on and so on.
Sure.
And I would say,
Yeah,
I
get
agree.
World War II was bad, Vaush. I think everyone agrees
Overwhelmingly.
that the Hitler and the Nazis were bad.
No, I know you think that. I'm just saying, I would be like, listen, Teddy Roosevelt fucked up Latin America. We fucked up Panama. We've done horrible shit. But just this time,
yeah,
I think we've got a good one. I think we finally found it.
And that's been the justification for every single U.S. intervention and invasion since World War II. And it's resulted in hundreds and hundreds of thousands and millions of people dead all around the world as a direct result of the enrichment of the weapons manufacturers and defense contractors. Of course, there's going to be a justification.
You would have invaded Germany.
Again, we can go back to World War II.
But there we go. That's it. Yes, people will lie. They will misrepresent information. They will try to sell you on every war, every drone strike. But just because they lie all the time, just because our government lies all the time, which it does, doesn't mean that every once in a while there isn't, just through sheer probabilistic outcomes, a chance at a good outcome.
Instead of running in circles, Vaush, I think that we can agree to disagree and agree that.
But we agree on the.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. And we can agree that every once in a while, even within a very unjust and unethical system, yes, every once in a while, there is an example you can point to, as the United States government and the State Department loves to, that yes, every once in a while, something is justified.
Yeah, even a drone strike, spooky as they are.
Right. And I'm not denying that. I'm not in the interest of denying reality. I'm just saying that that's what a principle is. Even if every once in a while you can find an exemption or something that goes against the principle, you still generally uphold the principle. Again, same with the death penalty, as I keep going back to. But again, we don't have to keep running in circles and talking about fucking the Nazis. I don't really see how that's productive.
I love talking about the Nazis. I fully agree with what you're saying. And if I had the chance to, if I could snap my fingers, do away with our entire policy with regards to drone intervention, including in Afghanistan. This is only as long as we have the bad system, 1 in every 1,000 outcomes will be acceptable to me. Same way I feel about a lot of bad systems. I don't like capitalism, but they make good video games now and again. Whatever. You roll the dice, you get what you get. But if I could take it all away, the 1 in 1,000 good and the 999 out of 1,000 bad, I would. And I think you both would too. And I mean, we agree on that.
I think that that's a good place to wrap this discussion. I thought this was a lot more fruitful than and good faith in discussing. Obviously, we were I won't lie, Vaush. I was a little terrified coming into the Vaush's den.
I'd love to talk to you in the future too. I like talking to you guys.
That's what I'm saying. I think that we've established a good rapport here, and I would be more than interested in chatting again over either areas of agreement or disagreement, because I like having nuanced discussions like this where nobody fucking blows their gasket. So thank you for having us on, and thank you for chatting with us.
Yeah, no, the pleasure's mine. I don't like shouty arguments for the most part. They don't get, they're not that fun. I like talking to folks. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks, Vaush. We appreciate the conversation. It was really fascinating. Have a good rest of your day, man.
Be well.
Peace out.
Oh, I cut that one too early. Shit. All right. The anti-war guys are gone. So anyway, 9 out of 10 drone strikes are good, and only the ones that target civilians. Okay, sorry. Whew. It hurt my chest to have to lie for that long. Yeah, okay, so basically, we're trying to optimize the civilian casualties. No. I actually thought that was a good Guys, I feel like I did a decent job making my case there, didn't I? Wasn't that? I was trying really hard. I didn't want to just have a big beef off or whatever. I tried to make a good, because as a broad system, our attitude towards drone use is monstrously bad. And I've been consistent about that for my whole streaming career too, right? Like, the whole time I've been streaming, I've always been pretty clear in the whole, yeah, holy shit, they'll sign off on any drone strike, like, whatever. But, I mean, with the 9/11, Al-Qaeda boyo, whatever. It's fine. He can die. I would have used NATO intervention in Yugoslavia as a more recent example of justified intervention. I did not want to get into that one with them. But we were an hour into that convo. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm in favor of the NATO bombing of Serbia. Let's just open that one up. No, one at a time. No, Inca Blue. So the difference with the death penalty example is that you can always not do the death penalty with no harm. I should have made that more clear, but I felt like I was struggling to introduce nuance already. Not doing the death penalty costs you nothing. Actually, it saves you a lot. But when it comes to, like, on-the-ground situations in conflict, whether or not a person dies sometimes, you can't always live up to principle. You always want the cop to bring the suspect in alive, but depending on how the suspect acts, that might not always be possible, So in that case, it's like, so if there's a guy who I'm like 99.9% is like a murderous rapist, and I want him to be arrested, but then, like, the cop kills him because there was a shootout and he doesn't get to be arrested, I'll still celebrate that because I'd rather him be dead than alive, even if I would have preferred he be arrested. This is how I feel about school shooters, right? Like, if a school shooter gets killed in the standoff, I'm not sad about it. Like, I'll celebrate their death, But I would prefer if they got arrested. Because that's, like, I always prefer people who do bad things get arrested, A shootout is different death penalty? No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think the death penalty is necessarily comparable, because anytime a person gets the death penalty, there was another option where they didn't, where nothing is lost. But that's not the case when it comes to stuff like drone strikes or apprehending people. In those instances, abstemiousness can lead to entirely different outcomes, where you do lose something, Yeah, no more harm to others is the ethical utility that you preserve in either case. Supporting the good drone strike cedes all ground to the State Department? No, that's a retarded argument and your brain is damaged. And I've seen you in chat, so I know this isn't just a one-point decision that your brain is retarded. It's a multi-point thing. Literally any bad system can produce eventual good outcomes, and that doesn't justify the system altogether if you respond to them in a principled way. If I say, I sure am glad that Weinstein got arrested, I sure am glad Epstein got arrested, that does not mean that I'm holding water for the fucking, American criminal defense system, or the American, judicial system, That's just not true. You don't have to approach every issue with, like, a hardcore, ideologically deterministic black or white, attitude, because you fail to see the nuance, and it's really, really dumb. You guys realize that even in that convo, that my interlocutors admitted that if they had a purely ideological aversion to war, they would have not intervened in World War II, right? So there you go. So it's like supporting the good war of World War II cedes all ground to the Department of Defense to continue doing wars in general. It's like past a point, you can't never do good things just because bad things can also happen. You can oppose the general policy while supporting the individual action. I'm sorry, Deadass. I don't actually think that you're retarded. I was very mean, and I was engaging in some rhetorical shorthand. And I love you. Why do some people feel the need to read a script of West bashing virtue signaling? I mean, it's like an aesthetic for a lot of people, right? Like the way it kept being like, well, America's also a terrorist. It's not about moral high ground. America could be the literal worst country on earth, but the question wouldn't change about what the best outcome would be for, how to deal with terrorists on Afghanistanian soil, or Afghan soil. Yeah. Yeah, that was a good convo, though, I think. They were ideologically incoherent. That's why they freaked out about the World War II concern. The guy on the left did not like the World War II comparison, I feel, because he knew that it made my point really, really well. because he really didn't like that, but like he even acknowledged that it was like the same. Yeah, yeah, okay, fine. Because I feel like part of their brand is like, you know, the absolute principled, ideological 100% against the United States war machine sort of thing, which again, overwhelmingly, that's going to give you good outcomes, by the way. If a person is like, I will oppose war and drone strikes no matter what, most of the time they're going to be right. that principle is going to lead them to good outcomes, you know. But you know, he wasn't, and thank God, he wasn't trying to argue like, you know, we should have practiced isolationism in World War II. I was worried that he would, but he didn't, which is great. So if he didn't, you know, like, then there you go. That's the point made, I guess. Yeah. I think you may have a point about intervention, but without analysts of the situation, the structures guiding the intervention, it comes out sounding as if you're pro-America. I am pro-America. That's what I left on the table in that conversation. I love America. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's morning light what so proudly we watch is so gallantly streaming in the